welcome everyone. My name is Erica Estrada-Liu, and I serve as Carillon's Director of Design Curriculum. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this webinar with Dr. Rick Bell for students invited to consider the freedom fighting community. I will note that we are recording this webinar, and the webinar will be posted on the Carillon Community's website later this week. I'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Bell to introduce the freedom fighting community.
Thanks so much, Erica. Good to be with you. Good to be with anyone watching this recording. So I'm Rick Bell. I'm a professor of American history here at University of Maryland in College Park. And British, as some of you might have guessed from her hearing me talk these past few sentences. I was born in London and came to America for graduate school a long time ago and never left. I'm married to a woman from Missouri. We have two terrifyingly American children, aged 6 and 9 right now. And I specialize in the period of American history between the Revolution and the Civil War. And one of the things I teach at Maryland is a Carillon course called Fighting Slavery, which is the signature course for the freedom fighting cluster here. So what I thought I would do is introduce you to this course in some broad historical terms, thinking about its big questions and its big ideas for maybe 10, 15 minutes. And I'll finish with some very brief notes about how the course is organized in terms of grading and assessment. And then I encourage anyone who wants to learn more to reach out to me. It's very easy to find my email address. If you just Google my name, Richard Bell, Maryland, you'll find me right away, and you can send me an email with any questions you have about this course. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my slides now. I need my screen share enabled, Erica, so one extra press of the button on your end, and I'll be able to share my slides. If you make me a co-host, that can work. Okay, that should do it. All right, there we go. Live theater, everyone. And I think as of now, you can see my slides and hear my voice and see my face. So I'm going to talk for 10, 15 minutes about this course. The course itself is called Fighting Slavery. And how do you slay a many-headed monster? How do you defeat an economic system, slavery, that is deaf to the cries of conscience and morality? How do you destroy an entrenched special interest, slavery, that profits from treating people like property? For 3 centuries, men and women committed to resisting the spread of slavery in British North America and the newly United States grappled with these questions. They searched for ways to save themselves and to save others from the dehumanizing consequences of enslavement. And this course, this Carillon course, offers each of you a rare chance to step into their shoes. As we examine the different tools and tactics, means and methods that Americans, both black and white, have used to escape slavery or to try to exterminate it, we will confront the grand problems that animated all those who fought to end race slavery. Should slavery be fought with violence? How do you generate moral outrage? How do you convert moral outrage into political action? Whose responsibility is it to act? About a decade ago, in 2013, we marked the 150th anniversary of President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, which of course abolished race slavery in the 11 jurisdictions that comprised the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. In 2015, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America in 1865. This was an act of law that formally and finally outlawed race slavery across this entire country. These momentous events were reminders of the blood and treasure spilt during the Civil War to secure slavery's destruction. They deserve commemoration. Their authors deserve our praise. But these two important anniversaries, one of the Emancipation Proclamation, one of the 13th Amendment, as much as they illuminate. They suggest to the public, both at home and around the world, that the work of achieving slavery's demise was achieved by lawmakers in Washington with a few scratches of their pens. And that version of events is profoundly misleading. It is a lie that we claim as truth to avoid having to think or challenge ourselves. This Carillon course offers a different, more complicated vision of the fight against slavery. It advances the proposition that the demise of slavery in America was a long time coming, the result of many decades of struggle, opposition, and resistance by a large and often unfamiliar cast of characters. It offers you as students the chance to rethink the commonly held view that Lincoln's scrawled signature on the Emancipation Proclamation was the only important event in this nation's struggle with slavery. It wasn't. Quite the contrary. I wish to present to you in this class a dramatic conceptual alternative to this triumphal view of solitary presidential courage. I want to present to you in this class an alternative that places the acts of Black field workers and fugitives, of preachers and vigilantes, of white soldiers and activists alongside the familiar figure of President Lincoln, the great emancipator. So one of the goals of this course then is to convince you that the insatiable diversity and dynamism of slavery in America between 1619 and 1865 has been matched only by the unceasing variety and adaptability of attempts to overthrow and destroy slavery. I'm going to argue in our course that fighting slavery in America was not the work of a moment sometime in the mid-1860s. Rather, it was a process that was set in motion the first time that a European slaving vessel laid anchor off the coast of West Africa. The first time its crew hustled Black people aboard. The first time a ship like that deposited its human cargo on plantations in the Caribbean and on the mainland. Ever since those first encounters, master and slave have been at war, locked in opposition. Slave owners and slave traders worked tirelessly to put in place an airtight system of racial domination and subjugation that stripped individuals of all claims of citizenship, legal standing, and to freedom of movement and expression, and tried to turn those individuals instead into commodities, into machines to labor. But it didn't work. Enslavers' complete domination proved impossible to achieve. Why? Because enslaved people protested and pushed back at every turn. Enslaved people confounded enslavers' conceptions of a moral equivalence between Blackness and enslavement. Long before the American Civil War, African Americans had set about finding ways to free themselves, to exit slavery any way they could, to mitigate and manage slavery's worst effects, and to claim for themselves some sense of dignity, power, and individual identity. As we shall see in this Carillon course, slavery never had the consent of those it sought to oppress. No one in chains was ever indifferent to their own enslavement. Many chose to act upon the rage, pain, and grief that burned inside of them by finding direct and personal ways to seize freedom wherever they could. My point here is a really simple one. No one else was as determined or as resolute in the fight against slavery than enslaved people themselves. In fact, before about the 1770s or so, enslaved people in America fought this institution largely on their own. They were unable to imagine that their descendants would one day secure the support of armies of white allies, united with them in the cause of immediate abolition. And believe it or not, until Vermont became the first American state to ban slaveholding in its borders in 1777, the concept of banning, abolishing slavery had seemed nonsensical. It had no meaning. No one could imagine it because it had never happened. For all the generations before the 1770s, individual enslaved people had preferred to focus on liberating themselves, liberating their families. Only by taking this long view can we see just how isolated enslaved Africans were in the beginning, and just how many decades it took for any organized coalition of northern free Black people and their white allies to emerge. And even then, enslaved themselves who continued to take the lead. As the northern free Black population grew in the aftermath of the Revolutionary War, the activists in their community linked their fates to those still enslaved, relying on Black freedom seekers from the southern states to testify to slavery's horrors to northern white folk who could never experience it for themselves. Let me say this as plainly as I can. Without enslaved people's daily demonstrations that they preferred freedom to bondage, no larger movement to obliterate slavery would have emerged before the Civil War. That Civil War that began in 1861 marked the climax of this ever-escalating fight. The scale and the seeming finality of wartime emancipation would soon obscure everything that had happened before. But the slave system had been compromised long before the Republican Congress, President Lincoln, and the Union Army drove a stake through slavery's heart and finished the job. A series of daily victories and defeats had propelled slavery's demise gradually, awkwardly, and unpredictably long before the federal government assumed the task of general emancipation in 1863. The enslaved themselves had spent centuries undermining race slavery in America any way they could, puncturing enslavers' fantasies that they provided enlightened care for a race of biddable Black children. So those, in a nutshell, are some of the themes of this course. As you can tell, it's hard-hitting, complicated, difficult material. You need a strong stomach sometimes for some of the subjects we'll be talking about, though we'll try to do so as sensitively as we can without sugarcoating any of this. But if you're up for that, I think you'll find this a very intellectually stimulating introduction to how American history is studied in college at the university level. And I want to end very briefly now by turning to some specifics of this course. This is a lecture and discussion course. There's about 26, 27 lectures in this 15-week course, and we will use them to follow the story of opposition to African slavery in America from the dawn of European overseas expansion in the late 1400s to the end of Reconstruction after the Civil War in 1877. And I'll divide those 4 long centuries into 5 generational periods using categories from a famous book by the historian Ira Berlin. So you can get a sense of this from how this is broken up on the screen here. So the first clump or cluster of lectures and readings is devoted to the charter generations, the period from roughly 1492 to roughly 1699. Subsequent clusters of lectures and readings will describe the plantation generations, the revolutionary generations, the migration generations, and finally the freedom generations in and around the era of the Civil War. And each of these generational clusters will include one lecture in the cluster devoted to understanding why slavery continues to spread in the chronological generation in question, thus providing a useful counterpoint to the species of resistance that we'll examine in all the other lectures in that cluster. Then, when we get towards the end of the semester, we will finish up with a pair of concluding lectures that will ask you to consider connections between the story of American opposition to African slavery and the ongoing struggle to eradicate sex slavery, domestic slavery, and debt slavery in this country in 2023. We'll have readings every week. We'll discuss them once a week, most likely after each Wednesday's lecture. All the readings I'm going to assign you for our discussions will be published in a free source pack, and we'll put backup PDFs on our website in case you lose the source pack. And all of our readings will be primary sources, which is documents written by those who were there at the time. I think this allows us to encounter many of our historical subjects in their own words, and with as fewer intermediaries as possible. And to conclude, let me just say that this class also includes 3 writing assignments, an essay of 5 pages long, an essay of 6 pages long, an essay of 7 pages long. Do you see the pattern? About which I'll have more to say as they approach. And because it's a particular type of gen ed, there also has to be a final exam of some sort as well. But I really privilege discussion participation of any kind, especially during discussion. So if you have ideas and opinions and you've done the reading, I want to hear from you lots and lots. So embrace that opportunity. All right, I will probably stop there. It says here questions. So I just remind you that if you have questions, please reach out to me. You can Google me and find my email address. My name's Richard Bell, B-E-L-L, Richard Bell, Maryland, where I teach. My email address will pop up right away, and then you can send me a note and we can get talking about whether this course is right for you. I hope it is. I'm really proud of the work we do in this course and being part of the Carillon movement as well. Thanks very much indeed.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bell. I also wanted to follow just by showing a couple of quick reminders of deadlines, upcoming deadlines. And I know you're probably very familiar with these deadlines. You've seen them before, but just as a reminder, we are holding an in-person admitted students open house tomorrow on campus. And there's a couple other, one more on April 10th and a virtual one on April 21st, in case you'd like to join to learn more about Carillon Communities as a whole. And for international students, the deadline to confirm enrollment is May 1st. And then, of course, the deadline to submit housing and dining agreement is May 1st. And if you have questions for Dr. Bell, definitely contact Dr. Bell. If you can't find his email address, feel free to also email the Carillon email, which is carillon@umd.edu, and we'll forward your questions to him. Or if you just have questions more generally about Carillon Communities, feel free to route them to that email address. Great. Well, again, thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you on campus. Take care.